everybody. As Augustus mentioned, this is a Tesseract series. We've been wanting to do this for a while. We're going to be talking to luminaries in the field of ufology, as we know it, and people that really have been on the front lines of the investigation of this phenomenon. And what we have here is Dr. Colm Kelleher. He was the lead biochemist at Skinwalker Ranch under the National Institute for Discovery Sciences, and later on was at the Advanced Aerospace Special Weapons Applications Program at the DoD. And he has come in as a skeptic to the field, but has left as a believer, which is why this is a most interesting sort of conversation. So, Colm, if you'd like to, if there's anything that you would like to add there with respect to your own introduction, please go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. And I guess the best way of summarizing my background is I have a PhD in biochemistry, spent a lot of time in medical science research at the Ontario Cancer Institute in Toronto. And also I did immunology research at the National Jewish Center for Immunology in Denver. So my background is really biochemistry, immunology, molecular biology. And I came across a very bizarre advertisement in Science magazine, which is kind of one of the premier journals in the world. Looking at the job section, I was amazed to see an ad that was asking for scientists who were interested in researching the origins and evolution of human consciousness in the universe in the middle of a series of ads for postdoctoral fellowships in virology, in biochemistry, molecular and cell biology. So I was sort of looking at this ad, which was actually a half a page ad, which was an expensive ad for Science magazine. So I picked up the phone and called, and eventually I got in touch with a guy called Robert Bigelow, who it turns out had just begun an organization of scientists called the National Institute for Discovery Science. So I flew to Las Vegas, did an interview, was hired by Robert Bigelow as one of the first scientists in the National Institute for Discovery Science. And then within a month of my being hired, Robert Bigelow had actually purchased a 500-acre ranch in northeastern Utah, which was sort of it was a completely unknown ranch at the time. This was all the way back in 1996, in August of 1996. So a long time ago. So within a few weeks of being hired, I found myself on what later became known as Skinwalker Ranch. But at this time, this was a very, very secret ranch, and it had been purchased in order to set up what would be loosely called a paranormal laboratory, which is a bevy of instrumentation and sensors, everything from electromagnetic sensors to optical sensors, acoustic sensors, radiation sensors, as well as individuals who were installed on the property. So during that time, I spent over 300 days and nights on Skinwalker Ranch in the next few years, and it became my second home. So I think there are very, very few people who have spent 300 days and nights on Skinwalker Ranch. And so what I learned from all of this focus on Skinwalker Ranch was that you can actually apply the scientific method into anomalies, provided you have some very, very good people around you. And that includes the staff, the scientific staff of the National Institute for Discovery Science, but also, in addition, we had a science advisory board, which was comprised of people who were from Los Alamos laboratories, from various universities around the country. We had professors of computer science, statistics. We had medical physicians. We had scientists. We had engineers. So we had a very broad spectrum of people who really insisted on holding our feet to the fire. And that's a key part of doing this kind of research, because unless you're applying the scientific method to the best of your ability in these kind of strange arenas, it's very easy to wander off the path and go down these tangents, which can result in a lot of strange stuff that is not necessarily scientific in character. So that's a kind of a very short summary of how I transitioned from mainstream science into a full-time occupant of Skinwalker Ranch.
Incredible. Thank you, Colm. So we've actually covered one of the major things we wanted to get into, which is the origin story. So thank you for sharing that with us. But I want to perhaps hit a little bit more into the details of your personal experience at the ranch. And this could go into your actual observational experience, like your own personal experience of the phenomenon, and also in scientific terms, in empirical terms. So as you started spending time on the ranch, was there a specific moment when you realized that whatever it is that you were experiencing or measuring was something that truly went beyond the realm of conventional scientific understanding?
Well, one of the first things that we did when we got on Skinwalker Ranch was we set up a command and control center on the eastern edge of the ranch, which was essentially a double-wide trailer with bedrooms and offices, so that we could set up equipment and we could test equipment before going out onto the ranch in order to conduct investigations. So I was on the ranch full time with myself, a PhD in physics, who had spent a lot of time working on the Voyager missions with NASA. He was a physicist, a theoretical physicist, as well as a deep engineering background. And we also had a full-time veterinarian on staff, which may seem weird at first, but one of the central parts of the Skinwalker Ranch in the early days was that we had a lot of cattle dying under mysterious circumstances, and that is a completely separate thread that I'll be happy to go into, further down the road. But this whole area of cattle mutilations and animal mutilations is probably a whole hour of explanation itself. So I'm not going to go down that particular road, but suffice it to say that very, very soon after we got on Skinwalker Ranch, I was standing outside this command and control center, chatting with the PhD physicist who had been hired just like me a couple of months prior, when we were standing looking north on the property, and to the north of us, there's a bluff. It's like a cliff that's about 300 feet high, and it is called Skinwalker Ridge. And so over that ridge, as we were chatting, this really fast-moving, low, very bright light came right over the ridge. It was traveling very quickly, about the speed of an F-18 fighter. I live in Las Vegas, Nevada, very close to Nellis Air Force Base, so I'm very familiar and have been very familiar with how fast these fighter jets can move. So this thing came over from the north over Skinwalker Ridge. A bright light. It was low enough that you could actually see structure behind it, and then right above our heads, it did a perfect hairpin turned and went all the way back over Skinwalker Ranch. Now, remember, we're standing in the middle of nowhere, out in the middle of northeastern Utah. The nearest small village is about sort of 8 miles away. It's deathly silent. And this thing was pretty low. There was absolutely no sound. And the turn that it executed was way, way tighter than anything a fighter jet could ever come off. It would pull off. It would be as fast and as it was almost like a 180-degree turn, that it flipped and went all the way back and retraced its tracks back over north over Skinwalker Ridge and was gone probably in 90 seconds. But that structure that we could see behind the object looked to me like looked like a real structured object. But the really bizarre thing was it was completely silent. Now, I know that the United States Air Force does have baffled helicopters and is capable of baffling sound, but this was completely 100% silent. It was low. It executed a turn that would have killed any pilot on board because of the incredible G-force that it executed. And then it went right over our heads. It executed this beautiful turn right over our heads and then headed back over Skinwalker Ranch, or Skinwalker Ridge. So that was my introduction to something that, I'd never seen before. It was difficult to explain. And the eerie silence around this whole thing was very bizarre. I guess that was the first incident that really drew my attention, that, maybe some of this stuff is difficult to explain. But I had a second incident a few months later it really caught my attention. And I happened to be standing in a small pasture about a mile west of the Command and Control Center on Skinwalker Ranch. I was standing right next to this same physicist, as it turns out, and we had a variety of equipment with us, but it was close to midnight on a summer's night. It was beautiful. It was the stars were out, and we were there because other investigators on Skinwalker Ranch had reported strange lighted phenomena in this area in the previous nights. So we were there to check it out to see if we could see anything. So we were standing there. We had two dogs with us. And we utilized dogs as biosensors on Skinwalker Ranch. They were extremely alert, and they were easily able to pick up things that sometimes we could not pick up. So we were very we had this symbiotic relationship with these dogs that would alert us to things that were in the environment that sometimes we were slow to see. So we had these two dogs with us, and they were sitting right beside us. But then out of nowhere, about 100 feet away to my left, suddenly out of nowhere, there was this, I would say, basketball-sized area of intense bluish white light that suddenly appeared in the pasture. Now, this is a long, narrow pasture with trees on either side of the pasture. And there's really nothing else in the pasture except old abandoned buildings to our right. But this object suddenly appeared out of nowhere to our left. And the dogs were right beside us. The dogs were looking at this thing intently. And it was this basketball-sized area of bluish. It was a circular bluish light that maintained a sort of a wobbling existence it was no more than 5 seconds. And then suddenly it just vanished. And we had extremely powerful flashlights with us, the kinds of flashlights that law enforcement people use for crowd control, extremely powerful flashlights. So immediately we activated these, and the entire pasture lit up, because our thinking was that, somebody or something was there. We lit up the entire pasture. There was absolutely nothing there whatsoever. So this object that had appeared in the pasture was no more than 12 to 15 feet off the ground, maintained this sort of wobbling permanence, and then suddenly vanished. Now, the interesting thing was that at that stage, we had night vision, Generation 3 night vision binoculars with us. So we activated these binoculars. At least the physicist to my right activated binoculars and started scanning the area around him to see if there was anything that could be seen through Generation 3 night vision binoculars. he started reporting a black shadow that was moving through the trees right opposite us, maybe 100, 150 feet away. It was moving to the north, this black shadow through the trees. And he was getting very agitated at this stage. I could not see anything. I did not activate my night vision binoculars. I was manning one of these mechanical old cameras. At the time, we were using infrared film to see if we could catch anything on infrared film. So I was taking long exposure shots while this guy was reporting stuff. But suddenly his voice started rising. He started evincing this panicky tone of voice and said that something had got hold of him and something mentally got hold of him. And the next thing he heard a voice saying in a very unfriendly tone, "We are watching you." And at the same time, he was watching this black shadow move through the trees, blocking out the stars on the other side. I was taking long exposure, infrared film shots. Eventually, this guy sort of went through the whole panic phase, and then eventually this black amorphous object in front of him started disappearing through the night vision binoculars, and half a minute later it was gone. There was nothing left, and this whatever had taken hold of this guy's mind had also disappeared. But the interesting thing was both of the dogs had gone from being relaxed to being extremely tense, and they were jammed up against the back of our legs. Both of them were fixated on the tree line as this guy was reporting this black shadow object moving north through the tree line. So the dogs were extremely intent on whatever this thing was. It turned out that after we went through the whole process of debriefing and we went through the whole process of developing the film with the infrared film, nothing at all appeared on the infrared film. But whatever this guy was seeing through the Generation 3 night vision binoculars, I was not able to see. But I was able to see this brightly lit object that had appeared to my left on Skinwalker Ranch. So I guess those two events collectively introduced me to the sort of the weird activity that happened on Skinwalker Ranch, and we spent years on the property with sensors. We had a lot of different sensors on the property, electromagnetic sensors. We had electric sensors. We had magnetic field sensors. We had round the clock, 24-hour, 7 days a week surveillance. With various surveillance cameras operating, and we did capture fleeting transient phenomena, but nothing that we could ever write up in a scientific journal as a scientific paper.
So, Colm, this is incredible. Thank you for this share as well. You mentioned something interesting. This is a slight deviation from the structure that we had planned to go with, but I can't help it because it piqued my curiosity. You said that your colleague had a communication that said, "We are watching you." Was this in English, or was this literally akin to some hearing a voice in your head speaking in the English language, or was it the final sort of impression that it was giving to your colleague?
Like a telepathic implant.
Well, according to this guy, I was standing about 5 or 6 feet to this guy's left. I did not hear any voice. But when we later debriefed him, he said it was a male voice. It was in English, and it was quite unfriendly, borderline hostile. And it was, he said he heard it as if it had been spoken, But, I did not hear anything. So one has to conclude that he heard it on the, inside his head, so to speak. However, the interesting thing about it was that this guy, for a couple of years afterwards, also had nightmares and very sort of broken up sleep for a couple of years after this incident. And we debriefed after this. We went back to the command and control center, and we debriefed with a couple of psychiatry people, some MD PhDs that were on contract with the National Institute for Discovery Science. And the bottom line from this is that, according to this physicist, these words that he heard were a male voice. They were spoken in a very unfriendly tone of voice, and they were intended to be threatening. Now, I should mention that the overall sort of affect of what we experienced on the Skinwalker Ranch was a combination of deceptive activity as well as games that were played in terms of dogs disappearing, cattle being mutilated on the property, and the feeling that we were always one step behind this whatever this phenomenon or intelligence was. We were always one step behind. So the overall sort of affect of what we were experiencing on the property was not sweetness and light and sort of enlightenment and love and all of that. It was kind of the opposite. It was a series of mind games and sort of, demonstrations that we were always one step behind.
And that's very interesting because it segues perfectly into the next sort of topic that we wanted to cover, which is the first of the two major topics we want to cover. Robert Bigelow uses perhaps the most interesting, in our opinion, phrase to describe the phenomenon: precognitive sentient phenomenon, and which then leads you to conclude, well, it's capable, first of all, that it has a will, that is it's not natural phenomenon, such as it's not thunder and lightning and the wind. These aren't just physical processes that are happening. There's an agency involved there. And that it is capable of a sort of precognition. And we wanted to drill down a little bit deeper into that. But Augustus had a number of questions that he wanted to ask, but I just wanted to set that up for folks. And Augustus, please take it away.
So just this week, we have a Google engineer blowing the whistle saying that they have an artificial intelligence that's became sentient, and it's been, dismissed by the vice president of Google. And I'm wondering, is it because our baseline understanding of what sentient is skewed or off? Because when you're going about creating these types of conclusions, which I'm all for, I really couldn't describe it in a better way myself, is there any type of equipment or unit of measurement or experimentation, tests, data collection, readings that will create that baseline for you in the sense of being able to label a being sentient, let alone being able to create those same types of tests or experiments? Robert Bigelow describes them sometimes as games. How do we set that up in order to come to this kind of a conclusion?
Well, I guess one of the arms of activity that occurred on Skinwalker Ranch, and this also sort of morphs into the transition from the National Institute for Discovery Science into the government funded program that began in 2008 via the Defense Intelligence Agency. And the Defense Intelligence Agency funneled $22 million into the AAWSAP, what was called the AAWSAP program, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program, which was contracting Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, BAS, to execute this AAWSAP program. So at the latter stages of the NIDS operation and the beginnings of the AAWSAP program in 2008, there were a variety of communication attempts, and setting up games on the property became a common feature of attempting to, quote unquote, communicate with this. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about, and that is that at one stage, we had 2 security officers and the ranch manager on the property. This was in between the scientific staff were not on the property at this time. So in the command and control command and control trailer, we had instructed the security officer to set up a set of ball and jacks. You're probably familiar with these old sort of very, very, very old small structures that can be set up. We set them up on a table in a particular pattern in order to encourage whatever was there to communicate in some way with us. And so we photographed a particular pattern on the table. The ranch manager was present and also took photographs of this pattern that was on the table. Then we executed we tasked the security officer with exiting this command and control center, closing the door gently behind, waiting for 15 minutes, and then re-entering the trailer. When he re-entered the trailer, the pattern of the ball and jacks, and he validated that there was nobody else on the property at the time, and we went through all of the natural due diligence, and we eventually from the photographs, we found that the jacks and the balls had been arranged in a completely different pattern within that 15-minute time span. Now, I'm talking about broad daylight in the middle of the day when there was nobody else around. There was no seismic activity that might have disturbed the table in the middle of the in the middle of the command and control center. There was no wind blowing. There was no sort of doors banging or anything like that. But the pattern of the ball and jacks was completely different when the security officers re-entered the trailer, and this was an indication to us that. Having ruled out all of the trivial explanations, this was an indication to us that something or someone was capable of rearranging in a very, very fine, beautifully color coordinated manner, because when we examined the photographs, we saw that our sort of random distribution pattern of the ball and the jacks on the table had been changed, and there was a carefully sort of very precise array of color coordinated ball and jacks that were on the table. And quite frankly, we didn't even figure out the color coding until we spent many hours looking at the sets of photographs, comparing before and after this event. That's an example of the sort of the toing and froing that we were doing with this phenomenon. And there were several other attempts to replicate this particular experiment that moved into the AAWSAP program. What I just described happened just before the AAWSAP program initiated in 2008 with military people on the property. The security officers were put in charge of they were tasked to put out many, many different types of experiments. Some of them showed telltale signs of being interfered with, but the vast majority of these experiments were not touched. They were never touched except for that first very, very dramatic to and fro in terms of what could be termed a communication. And, we also put out a lot of communication attempts regarding different letters of the alphabet, different ways, permutations, mathematical equations were put out. But the quote unquote phenomenon was always in control of whether or not communication quote unquote occurred. And this was a long-term aspect of not being in control of the scientific variables, which is a fundamental tenet of the scientific process. It was constantly sort of reinforced to us that we were not in control of the variables of the experiment. We were never able to be consistently able to replicate anything. There were many, many experiments that we tried. The vast majority failed, except for the kinds of examples I've just talked about.
So, Colm, this is excellent because it absolutely hits on the sentient aspect of the precognitive sentient phenomena. But I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on the precognitive aspect, and just to provide some clarity on that. It seems in other cases, whether it's individuals just having observations and experiences, all the way to situations like Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich and Commander Fravor having an experience where the phenomenon seems to know prior to actions occurring that they will occur and react accordingly. And to put a finer point on that, it would be one thing if that is the case with our brains, with our own biological processing. It would be a totally different thing if that it was also the case with respect to sensors, with respect to measurement devices. And if you could comment a little bit on that, that would be tremendously appreciated.
Well, there are many different aspects to this, and I think again and again our experiences as scientists attempting to pursue the scientific method in this kind of shadowy arena where things happened out of left field. Again and again, this happened. You mentioned Commander Fravor and Lieutenant Alex Dietrich. I don't know how many of your audience know, but the AAWSAP program, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program, were the first DIA-funded program on UFOs that had been carried out for many, many years, at least that the government was admitting to. And part of that program was investigation of both UFO activity through the United States as well as internationally. So the case that you're referring to, Commander Fravor and three other pilots being vectored out to about 50 miles off the coast of San Diego, that interacted with this object, this white tic-tac object, that displayed activity and performance that was way beyond anything that our United States military was capable of. But as pertaining to your question, this object jumped from the surface of the ocean off the coast of San Diego to a point called the Cap Point, which was the pre-designated location where all of these jet fighters would be targeted to in the event of an emergency. This was a secret location that nobody knew about except the people who were flying these high performance jets, as well as the people on the carrier strike group off the coast of San Diego. So the fact that this object jumped from the surface of the water to this exact point 25 miles away in a couple of seconds was a complete and utter demonstration of this precognitive sentient intelligence, which was mirrored on the Skinwalker Ranch again and again and again. I'll give you a very short example here. We spent enormous amounts of time trekking around the ranch, setting up our equipment based on what had happened the night before in order to try to capture evidence of this phenomenon. We did capture transient video of fast-moving objects. We captured transient increases in magnetic field, et cetera, et cetera. But it became very obvious that we would set up a lot of experiments in a particular location on Skinwalker Ranch, and then we would find out the following morning that this activity had occurred on the exact opposite end of the property. It would be reported by, say, neighboring ranchers or whatever, but we would be left with the unmistakable feeling that this, whatever this was, and we never got fully in touch with what this was, but it was obviously intelligent. It was obviously capable of anticipating our moves and then taking evasive action. It was always a couple of steps ahead of us. And in terms of theoretical constructs, our focus, both during the National Institute for Discovery Science program as well as the AAWSAP program, was in attempting to collect data in the absence of, a lot of interpretation of that data. Our bottom line was to collect as much data as possible on performance and also on effects of these, whatever this was on humans. So, pertaining to the general scope of the, of the program, we actually had 50 full-time people on the AAWSAP program. We had PhD level scientists, master's degree people, we had engineers, we had database experts, we had analysts, we had translators, because we were translating databases that were being imported from French UFO groups, from Portuguese UFO groups, Brazilian UFO groups. We also had senior people from military intelligence that were seconded by the Defense Intelligence Agency as part of this effort. And we also had a lot of security officers. We also had MD PhDs who were on contract with us in order to investigate the medical effects of close encounters with UFOs. And, one of the bottom lines that we obtained from the AAWSAP program was that getting too close to these kinds of objects sometimes had medically deleterious effects. We documented changes in human immune systems. We were able to take serial blood samples. We were able to do MRI scans on people, and we showed that close encounters in some cases with these effects had deleterious medical effects on some of these people. So, we were asked by the Defense Intelligence Agency to evaluate these phenomena, whether or not they were a threat to national security or not. And we were able to come up with a lot of evidence to show that these things had really high levels of performance, and they were capable of injuring people, but we were never able to gather sufficient data to demonstrate intent of this phenomena, which is a prerequisite to defining a level of threat in terms of national security. So these objects were definitely a threat to human health, but were they a threat to the national security of the United States? We were not able to answer that question after 27 months and $22 million funneled through the Defense Intelligence Agency.
So, Colm, you've already provided actually the perfect segue into the next major topic we wanted to cover. But right before we leave this, I did want to ask you, you mentioned earlier this sort of impermanence that the phenomenon maintains. It almost seems as if it is unable to sustain its continued manifestation in what we consider our three-dimensional waking reality. However, it does leave behind certain artifacts. Now, I was wondering if you could comment from your own expertise in biochemistry, how, if at all, any of these were measured, particularly some of the odors, some of the smells that lingered from some of these incidents that occurred at the ranch?
We were able to capture a small amount through these hydrocarbon sniffers, but we had some evidence, only very preliminary evidence, of being able to capture small amounts of these odors. There's obviously high levels of sulfur. We were able to do gas chromatography, mass spectrometry analysis on some of this, but it was very preliminary data. We were never able to get data that was replicated multiple times in order to be able to publish in a scientific journal. But going back to your question about whether or not these phenomena are unable to maintain a presence in physical reality, one possibility is that the phenomenon may be able to maintain a presence, but may be unwilling to maintain a presence in terms of the overall affect that we came across both during the AAWSAP program and the prior National Institute for Discovery Science program, is that there seemed to be a level of deception involved with this phenomenon that never wanted to reveal itself, so to speak, never wanted to be fully measured, only transient measurements were always available. And, this property, beginning in 1994, was inhabited by a ranching family that soon were driven off the property. In August of 1996, Robert Bigelow purchased the property. We maintained a continuous presence of personnel and also sensors all the way up through 2016, when Robert Bigelow sold the property to a real estate property developer in Salt Lake City. His name is Brandon Fugel. He installed a team on the property with sensors and with measuring capabilities, and that continues all the way through mid 2022. So beginning in 1994 all the way through 2022, this property has been the focus of extensive multi-team, multi-personnel measurement and investigations for pretty well close to 27, 28 years. Now, in terms of other properties on the planet, there are very, very few properties in existence that have had this same combination of personnel located on the property as well as instrumentation located on the property for that length of time. The only other comparable one would be the Hesteland Valley in a fjord in Norway that has been consistently instrumented for decades, but they have not had the same focus of personnel. And one of the aspects that the National Institute for Discovery Science always focused on, as well as the AAWSAP program always focused on was the installation of people, of animals, and also of instrumentation, because you've got dogs as biosensors, you've got humans for eyewitness collection, and then you've got instruments to independently collect data. So unless you've got all three of those, you are potentially able to miss some stuff. But I wanted to also touch on something that is in our book, the Skinwalkers at the Pentagon book that we published. It is a particular feature of the Defense Intelligence Agency investigation of Skinwalker Ranch, and that is the Defense Intelligence Agency, in order to corroborate what was going on at Skinwalker Ranch, deployed 5 different intelligence agency, military intelligence officials on the property to see if they could corroborate any of the quote-unquote anomalies that had been reported. All 5 of those military intelligence people experienced bizarre activity on the property. That's number one. But even more bizarre was that all 5 of them, once they had finished their deployment on Skinwalker Ranch and they flew back to their homes on the East Coast, every single one of them brought something home with them to their families. And that is that within a few weeks of returning from Skinwalker Ranch, their wives and their children started reporting all of these bizarre paranormal phenomena that would erupt in their households. And the kids would suddenly awake at night and see these black, shadowy humanoids standing over their beds. They would see balls of light flying through their houses. In some cases, they reported these bizarre mythological creatures that were seen out in the backyards of these people. Not only these people, but also their neighbors and sometimes their school friends would report bizarre activities. So we actually coined this phrase. It became so common for people who had been on Skinwalker Ranch to bring something home with them to the East Coast that we coined this hitchhiker effect. And this hitchhiker effect has been consistent through many, many generations of investigators on the property. I personally have my wife has witnessed activity in our homes. George Knapp, the journalist who has spent a lot of time on Skinwalker Ranch, he has experienced stuff in his home. Robert Bigelow has experienced family members seeing objects in his home. All of the security officers who were on the property also had experienced paranormal activity in their homes. So this is not confined necessarily to Skinwalker Ranch. When you spend time on Skinwalker Ranch and other locations, I should also mention, there is a tendency for something or some form of activity to attach itself to the person. That person gets on an airplane, flies 2,500 miles to the East Coast, and suddenly all hell breaks loose in their homes 2,500 miles away on the East Coast. We saw that effect again and again and again. So it has been replicated. I should also mention that the team that Brandon Fugel, the real estate property developer from Salt Lake City, he installed a large team of people. They have also independently reported, quote unquote, this hitchhiker effect that used to follow his scientists home to their locations, and their families and their children would experience all these bizarre apparitions in their households. So this aspect of the Skinwalker Ranch investigations only became really obvious after we were able to follow these people for months, if not years, after their initial experiences. And therein lies a really important point about the extent of putting resources into this kind of investigation, you've got to be able to study this phenomenon, not just for a weekend, but you've got to be able to study the effects of this phenomenon on people for, weeks, months, sometimes years.
Colm, so this is the fact that you bring up hitchhiking is incredible in and of itself, because it's the last topic of inquiry that we wanted to get into. The reason that we're bringing this up is because, well, both Augustus and I personally had experiences this week that we cannot explain. And I typically, I'm speaking for myself here, I'm very fastidious in believing or attributing something to other than supernatural, other than natural or physical phenomena. But I did have an experience that I could not explain, and So, I guess my question to you is, what is the level of exposure at which this hitchhiking aspect of the phenomena becomes an issue? Is merely talking about it enough? Is merely being in this room enough? You mentioned people's spouses also being affected by it when they had never been to the ranch. So I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Yes, I actually, it's interesting because the predominant feature of the so-called hitchhiker effect is that it's not the so-called primary recipient of the the experiencer on the property that sees all of this stuff once they go back. It's actually their families that experience all of this. I'll give you one example. One of the leader of the Defense Intelligence Agency task force on the property was a guy that we call Jonathan Axelrod, who eventually went through the ranks. He's a very high level Office of Naval Intelligence person with top secret SCI clearances, eventually became the civilian equivalent of an admiral in the Navy. So very, very high level person who had a couple of bizarre experiences on the property, flew back to his house, and within a few weeks, his two teenage sons started seeing these black, shadowy creatures standing over their beds when they would wake up at night. Very, very scary stuff. The kind of stuff that would make your skin crawl. They would go out and see these these entities in the hallway. But the really bizarre thing was that his wife was going to bed one night and was just about to shut off the lights in her backyard. And out in the middle of the yard, they saw this bizarre she saw this bizarre looking creature that looked like a large wolf. But the really unbelievable part of this was that it was standing on two legs, which is anatomically impossible, especially when it started walking. It walked into the tree line, and it was looking at her as it was walking into the tree line. So this was anatomically impossible. So it was some kind of a mythological creature. Now, the question is, was it in her imagination or was it real? So long story short, the two children independently saw one of these upright creatures standing in the backyard in broad daylight. It ran across the property in front of them, disappeared into the tree line. So the family went out to investigate the tree where the wife had seen this original creature, and there were extensive, deep claw marks on the tree that was right beside where the creature had been standing. Now, that indicates or suggests that this creature, whatever it was actually interacting with the environment. It was not a fantasy or a figment of this woman's imagination. It was interacting with the actual environment and left tracks on the trunk of the tree. So that aspect of the so-called hitchhiker effect, the fact that these apparitions are capable of physically interacting with the environment is a fundamental part of this, what this AAWSAP study found.
The AAWSAP documents that have been unclassified 2 months ago, there's I don't know how many, a total of 1,500 pages. I've been looking at all of the actual files. We've got like a drive here with all of the files: Defense Intelligence Reference Document, Acquisition Threat Support number. It's number 26. We find it titled Anomalous, Acute, and Subacute Field Effects of Human Biological Tissues. Now, being a biochemist, I thought that this would be perfect to bring up in its relationship to what we're discussing right now when it comes to these anomalous types of encounters and anomalous behaviors we see in this report that the AAWSAP program is able to categorize the anomalous behaviors through a categorization called AN 1 through 5. And
right.
AN4 to me stuck out the most. And I would really like to see or AN5, excuse me, stuck out the most to me. AN5 stuck out the most to me because it seems to me when we're discussing these hitchhiker kind of experiences, you might have things like nausea, and a handful of other negative side effects, poltergeists, things interacting with the environment, like you had just described. But what happens when it crosses that line of mortality and gets into the AN5, where we have reports of anomalous reports of injuries and deaths, and the SHC phenomenon, the spontaneous human combustion? Can you speak on that, and how much of these types of things that were classified up until 2 months ago were left out of these stories at Skinwalker Ranch, left out of the books? And how many of these classified things that have just now came to the surface relate necessarily to your research in biochemistry and this report here on these acute and subacute field effects on the biological tissue of a human being?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We actually did document in our book all of the different reports that our group submitted to the Defense Intelligence Agency. We submitted over 100 separate technical reports to the Defense Intelligence Agency, all of which are annotated in Appendix 1 of our book, Hitchhikers, our Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. But to your question, we had two. At all times, we had two MD, PhD medical experts with top secret clearances who were on our staff and at our beck and call at every moment during the 27-month program that occurred. And they were tasked with going out into the field and being able to take blood samples from people who had experienced these close encounters. And yes, as you described very accurately, some of these physiological and pathological effects that people had included intense vibrations in the body, evidence of burns, partial paralysis, extreme heat, extreme cold. Sometimes they would have metallic tastes in their mouth, temporary blindness. Nausea was a very, very common feature of having close encounters. Bloody nose, severe headaches, difficulty breathing, severe drowsiness. So all of these symptoms were documented in multiple people that had experienced these close encounter effects. And I'm not talking only on Skinwalker Ranch. There was one particular case that is documented in our book in which this biotechnologist was driving with his daughter near Bend, Oregon, on the west coast or the west part of the United States, when they saw these small blue UFOs that were darting around in the field beside them. Once they noticed them, these objects made a beeline for the car, and one of them went right across the front windshield. Two of them came into the car. One of them went right across the dashboard, but one of them went through this guy who was driving. Went through his left shoulder, went through his chest, and emerged through his right shoulder in front of his horrified daughter, who watched this object coming out of his right shoulder and then disappearing out of the window of the car really quickly. But bottom line is, within a few hours of this guy had an unbelievably intense headache. He had intense sunburn on the left side of his face. His ears had stopped, or his left ear had really swollen up. His left eye he had lost the sight temporarily in his left eye. Within a couple of weeks, his hair started falling out on the left side of his head. And long story short, he came down with a whole barrage of really bizarre immunological symptoms, where his neutrophil lymphocyte ratios went off the charts. He came down with a rare form of ductal carcinoma cancer, and eventually, after a couple of years, started to get well. He did not die. But I'm giving you this example of an intense interaction with one of these that had no relevance whatsoever with Skinwalker Ranch, but also had severe pathological effects. So the paper that you were referencing, that was one of the 104 papers that we submitted to the Defense Intelligence Agency, did reference a lot of these subacute effects that had effects that were extremely analogous to non-ionizing radiation effects. So our MD, PhD people documented on several occasions these effects, these physiological and medical injury cases. So bottom line is that being close to some of these UFOs are not good for your health, either short term or long term.
Wow. Thank you, Doctor. I want to just implore everybody, the link at the top of the room, I implore, please tap it, support, get the book. It's available here. And, Doctor, how are you on time right now?
I've also unfortunately got a hard stop. I've got a meeting I've got to go to. I've got a hard stop at this point, so I'm going to have to sign off in the next minute or two.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we all did, and we hope to hear from you again sometime soon. I hope you're having a blessed Sunday, and thank you again. This was truly an honor. Everybody at the Preservation of the Human Race is going to be listening back to this many times, and it will be the spawn of many, many conversations for the future. And thank you again.
Definitely. Thank you, Colm. This has been a true honor, and hopefully we can have you back again, because there's a whole lot more into the details and the truly transformative stuff with respect to the implications for our society, our civilization, that we would like to get into with you. Once again, thank you from everybody here at the Preservation of the Human Race.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. And yes, let's keep in touch about maybe future conversation.
That would be amazing. It's been truly fascinating listening to you speak, and we can't wait to hear from you next time. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
All right.